If you've ever looked closely at the famous images of William Shakespeare, you might notice something curious. The Chandos portrait shows a high forehead with thinning hair up on top, and his monument inside Holy Trinity Church, created not long after his death, suggests much the same image. Not bald exactly, but perhaps on the way. And then when we look at a much younger Shakespeare, such as the Wadlow portrait, we see something different. There's more hair in his younger years. This raises a delightful question. Was Shakespeare going bald? Let's find out right now on That Shakespeare Life. Let's begin with the evidence. What can we actually see? Well, the Chandos portrait, painted around 1600, shows a receding hairline, particularly at the temples. The monument at Holy Trinity Church, which was commissioned by his daughter, so they ought to know what he looked like, confirms this same impression. And when we compare these with the Wadlow portrait, the contrast is really clear. This is not a man who was always thin-haired. This is a man who was quite possibly going bald over time. Now, in Tudor England, a high forehead was actually fashionable. To be able to have that distance between your forehead and your hairline was something that people would seek out. It was associated with intelligence and refinement. But there's still a difference between a fabulous brow and a hairline that's quietly retreating. Shakespeare, of course, puts cultural tidbits like this in his plays, and he does actually comment on baldness in his works. He wrote about baldness more than once. In As You Like It, he says, "Is the forehead of a married man more honorable than the bare brow of a bachelor?" Here, baldness is playful. It's tied to age, marriage, and status. But later in the Comedy of Errors, the tone shifts just a bit, and he says, "There's no time for a man to recover his hair that grows bald by nature." That comes from Act Two. And this line, when you look at Shakespeare's portrait right beside this quote, it feels almost observational, like Shakespeare's apologizing for his hairline. Yeah, it seems very self-aware, especially if Shakespeare was watching himself get older and his hair slowly disappear. And then in Henry V, time becomes a culprit of baldness, saying, "Black beard will turn white, a curled pate will grow bald, a fair face will wither." So here, baldness isn't just a joke. It's something that's presented as inevitable. It's a mark of time passing. As you get older, your hair disappears, just like aging skin or your hair going gray. Even Father Time himself is mentioned in Shakespeare's plays as being a bald person. So while baldness could be a joke, it was also understood as something that everybody sort of went through. Now, there is a fun question of whether or not baldness was attractive for Tudor England. And the answer is kind of, maybe, not exactly. While a high forehead could suggest that somebody was really smart, baldness itself was often used as an insult, at least a point of humor, like it was something you could make fun of somebody for. Characters in Shakespeare's plays mock the idea of baldness, they tease people about it, and they definitely notice it. That's why you see things like, "You bald-pated, lying rascal." Baldness gets thrown around in there as an undesirable trait. But it is also really common, and it is very visible. In a world where appearance signaled status, health, and identity, hair, or potentially your lack of it, was an important thing to notice about somebody. There is an additional example from the Comedy of Errors. There's this whole exchange about the connection between hair and someone's wittiness or their ability to be sharp mentally, where the characters are arguing that men who lose their hair may be also gaining in wisdom. So they're basically saying, "Aha, well, I may be bald, but I'm really wise," And it's playful, but it tells us something about the time that people were making this connection between, if you're going bald, it means you're getting old. But of course, if you're old, you have more experience. So you are perhaps wiser than someone who is younger and has a full head of hair. So I'll let you debate the philosophy there, but that conversation was happening in Tudor England as well. Now, hair loss in Shakespeare's time wasn't always only about aging. You could also go bald through disease. Conditions like syphilis and even the harsh mercury treatments that were used to treat syphilis could actually lead to hair loss. So a balding man might not just be seen as older, he could also be seen as someone who was unwell or sick or had caught a venereal disease, which opens up a whole nother realm of conversation. At the same time, natural hair loss, what we'd call male pattern baldness, was certainly a thing that existed in this time period. And for a man in his 40s or 50s, like Shakespeare would have been when we see these portraits of him, it would have been entirely ordinary for someone to look this way. Now, if you were losing your hair, what could you do about it in Tudor England? Well, there were actual remedies for baldness. There were herbal tonics, oils, and treatments that promoted regrowth. Now, whether they worked really well, I can't tell you, but people were putting out these things that you could do to try and fix this problem as it would have been seen. And there were, of course, also wigs and hair pieces, but not as elaborate as you would see in later centuries. And then there were men actually who chose to shave their heads. I would think this was for both practical reasons to avoid stuff like lice or just to be done with it and be like, well, my hair's falling out anyway, just take the rest of it and let's be uniform. Now, a completely bald head by choice in Tudor England probably would have been unusual. Most men, like Shakespeare, just lived with the fact that their hair was disappearing. So, was Shakespeare going bald? Probably. He was, like many men, gradually losing his hair. But I like to think that that look worked for him. He's certainly famous for it today. And when we picture Shakespeare with a highbrow and a thoughtful expression, maybe it really does give him that much more wisdom. Now you know the history of baldness from Shakespeare's lifetime. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. If you like walking around in turn of the 17th century England to see the sights, smell the smells, play the games, and maybe even haunt an old theater or two, then this is the place for you. Hit that notification bell so you can be sure to join us on our next adventure. I'll see you in the next episode.